morning. Welcome to Morning Moments. I'm so glad that you came to join us today. Today, I have a guest that he is recommended from Deborah Watson, who I've just had a great interview with. Uh, Bob Willis. Bob Willis is a sculptor and also a grief counselor, among other things, through the years. And we've had a delightful time getting caught up to talk about our parallel careers. And Bob, welcome to Morning Moments.
Thank you, Andy. It's good to be here. Welcome to Oklahoma, buddy.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It took a little while getting the technical problems going on for this, but I'm so glad we got it together here. Tell us, Bob, what do you do and why do you do it?
Great questions. I want to answer the second portion first because God shoved me into it. It's almost like God prepared me and drop kicked me into grief ministry. What I do, I try to guide people to talk about grief. I want to give them the opportunity to put words to their pain. And that's what I do because God set it up. He prepared me. Gosh, 1995 is when I first began to work with Grievers. And I found some tools, Andy, some tools that helped me personally. And God's allowed me to adapt those tools into a setting, whether it's a group setting or individual, because I want people to understand that grief is very normal, very normal. I had a lady once in one of my grief groups, when I used the word normal, she said, Bob, the only thing normal in my life is a setting on my washing machine that says normal. Well, I went home and looked at the words on that washing machine dial. Normal is on there. And as it relates to grief, so is heavy load and light load. And when you just run in circles, not accomplishing anything, that's your spin cycle. It's on the dial. You cry a lot, that's your rinse cycle. All those words on the washing machine dial, but normal is there. So my intent is to help normalize some feelings and give people some tools. But I can tell you something, Andy, that probably the most important thing that helped me personally was realizing that after a loss in our life, whether it's a death or a divorce or someone leaving you or a death of a pet, whatever the loss has been, what we feel on the inside, that emptiness and loneliness, the sadness, that heaviness, that's your grief. And no one can see it.
Yeah.
And it's different for every person. But when you talk about it, it becomes mourning. So grief is on the inside, mourning is when it's expressed. Jesus did not say, blessed are those who grieve. Jesus did say, blessed are those who mourn. They shall be comforted. So my mission in life is to give people some tools to help them put words to their grief so they can talk about it. That's when they mourn. And probably what helps me the most there is realize I'm responsible to them, but I'm not responsible for them. I give them the tools. Whatever they do with the tools is up to them. But we can do that.
And I like what you said about it's their journey, because sometimes we want to put our timeline on somebody else's journey. And I've had people say, well, God said he's going to turn our mourning into dancing. And so I'm thinking, yeah, don't tell me about dancing because I don't feel like dancing right now.
And, exactly. Yeah, right. And people try to put a timeline. I've heard people say grief takes 6 months. Grief takes a year. Grief takes 2 to 3 years. But I do have a way to test to see when you're over grief. Is you can take your hand and you put it across your chest. If you feel a beat, you're not over it yet. It's that simple. Yeah. As long as we've got a brain and a heartbeat, we'll be grievers. But it is a matter of whether the grief controls us or we control the grief.
You know, in this time and the day and age that we're living in, there's been so many losses. And I also think that what happens with grief is that it's a cumulative effect. And if we've had a grief and loss of somebody who died of COVID, and then a family member die, and another death of a relationship and a divorce, they all pile up, and you're not through grieving through one, and you got another one on top of it.
Right, exactly. It does tend to complicate the grief when we haven't had time to finish one. It's almost like we have to put something on the shelf and say, I'll deal with that later. But it does accumulate and it does affect us. It'll complicate the grief process. And my intent, my role has always been to help people to recognize their grief, then organize it so they can verbalize it. Those 3 steps, I think that's how grief becomes mourning. I teach some tools, and I've written a book that has my tools in it. It's a way to, if you could have one more conversation with a person, if you could put them in a chair and talk with them one more time, what would you thank them for? That's a good place to start. The thank yous. That might be one word, and it may be 5 pages of written material. Thank yous and then apologies. What would we apologize to them for if we could have a moment with them? Then what would we forgive them for?
Yeah,
Sometimes, go ahead.
just because we deny it or stuff it down doesn't mean we've dealt with it.
Right, exactly. Because the least little thing will happen and it'll be right here in our face, because grief doesn't go away. And I have a friend who uses a term called grief burst. It's like a cloud burst. It comes over and dumps its load and moves on. Well, that's a grief burst. It can come out of nowhere and just it's right over us. Yeah, you're right. Those losses from our past will come out. And the word forgiveness, we know what it is from the spiritual realm of life. I depend on that every heartbeat. But in grief work, I have a different definition. Forgiveness is giving up the hope of a different yesterday. What took place 24 hours ago or 24 years ago will never be any different. So I've got a choice. I can hang on to it, hoping it'll change, or leave it where it belongs, and that's back there. And so I want people to have the opportunity to put words to what they would say if they forgive someone. It's not saying who's right and who's wrong. It's just saying, I can't carry this. Then there's 2 other elements I like for people to talk about. Actually, Andy, if you could talk with your loved one, what would you like to say to them? Then what would you like to hear from them? Okay, because relationships end before we're through with them. We had, what was it? Diamond Rio that had that song, One More Day. We had one more day. We wish we had one more conversation. So I give people an opportunity to talk about those things. What would you like to say to them? And what would you like to hear from them? I think that allows people to recognize what's there, organize it so they can verbalize it. And that's when grief becomes mourning. And according to Jesus, that's when you find comfort, when you're able to put words to your grief. In Bible days, they had professional mourners. People would put on sackcloth and ashes and put dust on it. That was an outward expression of what these people back here were feeling. Well, until these people do their own mourning, they're not going to find comfort. We need to find ways to put words to our grief. And so the question was, what do I do? That's what I do. I try to give people tools and the freedom to talk about feelings. I'm not afraid of feelings.
When I talk to folks a lot about your purpose, your plan, and your future, a lot of times the Lord will put something on your heart. For you, it's the issue of grief.
Right.
And that becomes your passion of helping people through your grief, which in turn caused you to study more about it, to be more aware of it, so that you could help countless hundreds and thousands of people through that process. But when I ask people, why do you do and what do you do and why do you do it, it all comes to listing and hearing what God's purpose and plan is for you. And for you,
exactly,
God's directed you to that. And also, we got just a couple more minutes left, but you also use your gift of sculpture as well.
Exactly. Right.
Just your little frozen time there on our morning moments. Hopefully he's going to come right back.
Not healed, as you know, as a nurse. They just hold us together while God does the healing.
Yeah.
And one of the workshops I enjoy with people is having a table with grievers around that table, and I give everyone clay, and we all make one of those little broken hearts, and I give them the opportunity to talk about the past losses. Those are the stitches. Talk about what breaks their heart, and talk about who's helping to hold them together. We all have had bandages. We all need bandages. And so we realize God's doing the healing, but he will use people to help hold us together.
Yeah, and that's interesting to be able to use that tactile senses of touching and using that to maybe connect with our feelings of grief. That's wonderful.
Right. And from your counseling, a lot of time women will sit and talk to you face to face. Most of the time, men will not do that. They need to be busy doing something. If you put some clay in their hands so they don't have to look at you, they'll talk about feelings. Or
Yeah.
they'll go fishing with you as long as they're doing something. They don't have to talk. They don't have to look at you. So yes, it does provide a way for people to be busy to talk.
Yeah.
Okay, to be able to express it. So those are good opportunities. I enjoy those workshops
Absolutely. Now,
because I can't. By the way, I can't fix a griever, but I can fix something in clay. So that helps me.
some of you who've been listening to this say, "Oh, this is where I'm at. How could I know more about it?" You do have a book that you provide that's available, and we're going to put down below the links of how they could get a hold of it, and also get a hold of you if they need to,
Right.
and as well as hear about your other ministries using your sculpture ministry as well as your counseling ministry together. It's you've blended the two together in a wonderful way, and you're just to know more about that as well for you.
Mhm.
Is
Right.
any closing thoughts that you have for us today?
Just that probably there's two words. People don't know what to say to grievers. I've learned there's a two-word question. If you approach that griever and you can say, "What happened?" Then we close our mouth and open our ears and let grievers talk about what happened. I think that gives people the opportunity to talk. I believe grievers want to talk. They need a safe place to be able to talk about it. So if we can ask people what happened and we just let them unload, then while they're talking, they're mourning. That's when they find comfort.
You know, that's the I agree with you so much because through the years I've seen people feel like they want to have to fix something,
Right.
and that's when they say, and I must admit, some of those stupid things that I've heard come out of people's mouth is to
I know.
grievers, you know,
Right. I
and
agree.
if they could just, you know, tell the simple thing, what happens, and keep your mouth shut and just listen. They don't
Right.
need to hear the story of your grief. They don't need to hear the story of other things. They
Ah,
just need to share, and that's that is
so
I've said this so often that that's the most important thing is just listen to the person that's grieving. That's very, very
right.
good.
Right.
Thank you
That's when
so
they're
much.
mourning.
Thank you so much. I hope that you reach out. There's some of you that are going through situations, or you know of others that's going through it, and says, you know what, I think I need to send this interview to them. Please do so. And
Yeah,
there's a reason that you're listening to it today. Thank you, brother,
absolutely.
so much for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you. God bless you.
And thank you for joining us for Morning Moments. I'm going to ask you if you would keep on coming back, and may God richly bless you.